Hello class, today I'm going to be responding to Dexter Medina's claim that the FCC's repeal of net neutrality will negatively affect those who use the internet. Dexter's claim was supported by 3 supporting claims. 1, that the FCC's repeal of net neutrality is going to negatively affect internet services. 2, the repeal of net neutrality will negatively affect schools. And 3, the repeal of net neutrality will negatively affect small businesses. As evidence for his first claim that the repeal of net neutrality is going to negatively affect internet services, Dexter provided 2 past examples of the actions of internet service providers. An example of Verizon slowing down people's 4G connection speeds in 2014, an example of Comcast closing peering ports with Netflix until they were paid in 2013. These 2 past examples alone are not sufficient to conclude that the repeal of net neutrality will negatively affect internet services. My counterclaim to this is that the repeal of net neutrality has actually helped the development of better broadband deployment, as explained in an FCC press release, by removing barriers to infrastructure investment, promoting competition, and restoring the long-standing regulatory framework for broadband. The report describes the repeal of net neutrality as the primary contribution to new broadband deployment. For Dexter's second claim that the repeal of net neutrality will negatively affect schools, he says that schools that lack resources won't be able to afford the best internet, and claims that they then won't have access to many internet programs or will have too slow a connection to be effective. The problem here is that Dexter does not provide any evidence that the repeal of net neutrality will cause a dramatic increase in price of the internet service, as he's suggesting. Also, there is no evidence whatsoever suggesting that any school would have to purchase any kind of internet package in order to use the programs that they use already. This whole secondary claim is based almost entirely on speculation. The only evidence provided is a testimony by the CEO of the International Society for Technology and Education, where he says, "As soon as net neutrality goes away, we're back to where we were before, where students are getting shortchanged based on the zip code they live in." As you can see, even this quote is a speculation based on 0 evidence. Finally, we have Dexter's third and supporting claim that the repeal of net neutrality will negatively affect small businesses. Dexter states that small businesses thrive by advertising and claims that they will not be able to do that if they cannot afford the high-quality internet that the ISPs are providing. Dexter claims that businesses will have to pay for better data in order to get their name out there. However, there is no evidence provided whatsoever that suggests that anyone will have to pay more for the internet. This is completely speculative, and this entire claim assumes a point that has not yet been proven. Dexter provides a statistic that 99.7% of all businesses have fewer than 500 employees. This evidence is guilty of an irrelevant thesis. The statistic proves a point that most businesses are small businesses, but that is not what we are disputing. The evidence is irrelevant to the argument. Dexter also provides a testimony from Clayton Cowles, a comic drawer from Marvel and DC. There are a few problems with this evidence. The first problem is that Clayton Cowles is nowhere near an expert on the internet or on net neutrality. He only uses the internet just like we do. I do not think that this qualifies him at all to be used as evidence for this claim. Also, the quote itself is irrelevant to the argument. The quote is, "They pretty much have a monopoly. I'm stuck with them," referencing to his internet service provider, Spectrum. It is unclear how someone's poor experience with an internet service provider in the past gives any evidence on how small businesses will be negatively affected by the repeal in the future. If anything, I think that this evidence actually helps the opposing side. Because Cowles is so frustrated with the poor service, and because he uses the internet for his career, I'm sure he would greatly appreciate having a better service plan to be able to purchase. In conclusion, Dexter's claim is based almost entirely on speculation. I think that he could have made some really good points about the repeal of net neutrality had he provided some evidence to back the speculations. Thank you.
All right, Kurt, I thought that you did a good job organizing everything. It's easy to follow. You thoroughly go through the individual points. There's a lot of criticism of the evidence that the advocate used, or the lack or absence of evidence in several cases, that you kind of dismiss out of hand. The two examples on the first point, you kind of suggest that they aren't really significant or important enough to generalize from, and I could understand that, for instance, if you maybe gave it a little bit more context. This would be a good place to have some information and say, okay, we've had these two cases where Verizon slowed down the 4G in a particular case, and because the peer ports problem was not being paid for, the other company, I think it was probably Comcast, I forget who was mentioned in it, slowed people down to resolve a business dispute. These are fairly unique circumstances. By the way, I believe that both of those, maybe the second one happened after net neutrality went into effect. The first one might have been under rules where there was no net neutrality. That would be something to look at. But let's give it some simple numerical or statistical context. How many interactions are there? How many business relationships are there? How many internet drops are there? All that sort of thing. And here's their proof that this is a problem. You've got these two cases out of hundreds of millions of events that occur, not just on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, and maybe not even a daily basis, but on an hourly basis, and they've got two that they can point to as proof of their point. I think you could sell that argument a little bit more. Not that what you had was problematic. I thought you said the right thing there. The argument that the FCC is making here is that there are barriers because of net neutrality that are going to discourage people from expanding broadband services and options. I think that's a good counterclaim here, and I like the evidence that you have there. I just think that there needs to be a little bit more. In other words, this is the one solid piece of evidence that is specific to a point that you were making, and the rest of the arguments about evidence are mostly talking about the advocate's evidence, not your evidence. And so this is the one piece that you are really adding to the pool here, and I just think maybe some more information there would help that argument. There is a point at the end where you were trying to turn around that last argument and suggest, like the comic artist would probably appreciate having more options. And here's an example about how that could happen if we got more broadband availability, but people aren't going to invest in that if they know that they can't experiment, change their price structure if necessary, that sort of thing. So I think that there's a good argument there. It's applicable. I think you just need to make a little bit more argument on it. The argument about the schools, you challenge the absence of evidence. The one source that the advocate presented says we're going to go right back where we were, and the question then becomes, well, where were we? Did the advocate's evidence indicate that schools were suffering? We got a conclusionary statement from this one person, but there's no other data than that, and I think that that's the point that you're making here, and that's a pretty good answer. If you had any evidence that showed that schools were being perfectly successful integrating internet services in their districts at an elementary school level, that would have weighed a lot more against that argument. It's not that what you have is a bad argument, but let's face it, you want to have something more substantive than the advocate has, so that you, at the end, when you're saying, okay, if we're making this assessment, we're comparing our arguments, look what I've got compared to what they've got, and it's a lot easier to accept your conclusion. And then we already talked a little bit about the small business thing, because the only example that they have that is applicable to that is the one comic book artist who has difficulty uploading his drawings, apparently. And the notion that this has got something to do with net neutrality, I'm not sure where the link was in the original argument. Your challenge on the number of small businesses, yeah, there are a lot of small businesses, but the notion that they won't be able to afford something, that's the link that's missing, and I think that you've got good press on it. So the criticism of your argument is mostly that you've got a lot of presses, and I think they're very good, reasonable ones. They're challenges to the reasoning process that's going on. Just don't want to put all your eggs in the one basket and maybe get a little bit more ammunition there to extend that metaphor, or to mix that metaphor, I should say. Make a nice omelet out of it. All the eggs in one basket with your ammunition. That'll be quite the omelet. All right. Sammy's not here. Did not come in, okay.